One of the things I love about video game collecting is the ability to go into your collection and rediscover or reconnect with some games or some systems with which you've had very little contact. And that's happened to me over the past couple of weeks. I have a pretty sizable PSP collection. As the system was sort of winding down in its life cycle, I started picking up tons of games. I probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 or 70 PSP games, if you count the physical releases and then also the stuff I had on my PSP Go. Yes, I did have a PSP Go. And over the years, I've said, I'd really like to explore some of these games. I mean, some of these games I haven't even opened. A lot of them, SRPGs, JRPGs, and I just never really had time to play them. Plus, as the PSP aged, I always found that using the physical PSP, which was a good piece of hardware, nonetheless, it was clunky, the battery life wasn't great, the load times were an issue. And recently I discovered kind of a whole sort of internet subculture, if you will, that makes playing PSP games far more convenient. I'm not going to go into all the different solutions that are out there. You can Google those, but between programs and custom firmwares and all of that stuff, there is a lot out there that will allow you to re-access and really revitalize your PSP collection. So that's what I kind of experimented with. And having the ability to play all of these games, in a variety of different settings, whether it's on the couch, on the PSP itself, not have to switch out discs, and to just have everything at my fingertips has really given me a chance to explore the library a little bit. And what a wonderful library it is. I think in a certain sense, the PSP is the last vestige of the kind of gaming that I grew up with, kind of Japan-centric RPGs that started on the Super Nintendo. Of course, there are re-releases of Super Nintendo games on the PSP, but even beyond that, what I would call those traditional old-school JRPGs and strategy RPGs that really ruled the roost in the 16-bit and 32-bit era. And as I was buying up all of those games, as they were going on sale in Amazon in 2012, 2013, stuff like that, I knew that there was potential, but that I would never really get a chance to explore that potential fully. And now that I have, to a degree, with some of these enabling technologies that are out there, I can say that the PSP library, particularly the library that I've amassed, again, focusing not so much on the FIFAs and the Maddens, but those sort of Japanese gems that are out there, has really led me to believe that this is a collection that I could play for years to come. There are just so many good games on here if you grew up in the era that I'm talking about. I mean, we'll take a few. I mean, I reviewed the Lunar game for the PSP, which I think was excellent. The Persona series, delved into that a little bit. Of course, a lot of those games I haven't, the save files were from 5 years ago, so I couldn't quite remember what it was that I was doing back then. But slowly and surely, I got into, Persona 1, Persona 2, and the Persona 3 version. Tactics Ogre, Final Fantasy Tactics, games like that, just incredibly well done, incredible depth to those games. Final Fantasy 7 Crisis Core, which I guess some people didn't like, but I always enjoyed that game, sort of more action-oriented with the pachinko slot machine sort of battle system. We've seen some footage here from Outrun 2006. Again, not as good as on the Xbox, original Xbox, I should say, but fun nonetheless. And I think that's the other point about the PSP is that it did 3D respectably. There are some really good 3D style games on this system. Outrun being one of them. The Japanese golf game. Forget what it was called, what it's called in English, but it's Mina no Golf, maybe Everyone's Golf or something like that. Really nice 3D effects. Mod Nation Racers, the Ratchet and Clank series. which I picked up for like $2, and that was excellent. So this is a system that I think hit both groups. It did have the 3D capability to be that PS2 in your pocket, so to speak, but also paid homage to some of the great, the greatest eras in gaming, 16-bit, 32-bit, and the ability to play these games in higher resolutions and use your old save files and have save states and stuff like that, depending on which solution you go with to kind of update the experience, just is wonderful. And I can't recommend enough going and if you have a PSP library, trying to get the most out of it, or even just going back and my actual physical PSPs had not been used in a long time, so in addition to sort of exploring what I could do with it outside of the original constraints of the hardware, also going back to the original hardware, which I, again, hadn't played in a while, and now that my kind of days of investing hours and hours into these games in physical form was over, and I could sort of go back and appreciate just how slick the actual system was. And I joked about the PSP Go. The PSP Go I thought was a great little system. And when I was clicking through the 15 or 20 games I had on that, on the one hand I was like, oh, why did I sort of waste my money on these games? It's digital format. I'll never be able to kind of play them again unless I use the system. But the system was so slick. In a lot of ways it was, I think, better designed. It had just a better feel than the original bulky PSP, and just a slick little piece of hardware. So even that was fun to play. And I had the PSP, the silver PSP, I think, that came with Gran Turismo. And while it's kind of clunky, it's still the controls, minus the analog stick, but the controls are so tight on that system. And I actually had a lot of Japanese games downloaded to that, a lot of Japanese PS1 games, shooters, and Fire Pro Wrestling, and just the feel, the accuracy of the input on that original PSP or whatever original run of PSPs was really something special. Now the screen was kind of fading a little bit, but what can you do? So I really, if you're a retro gamer, I think the PSP has the potential, now that you have some options as to when and how you're going to play it, it has the potential to be that next great system to collect for. And when you consider you have a run of great games from, I guess when it came out, 2005 up through, I want to say the last game came out in 2014, 2015, Summoner Night 5 or something, which wasn't a great game, but nonetheless, tons of stuff to discover. You throw in the imports. There's some really solid import games to be played on the system that are relatively English friendly. Like if you like the Super Robot type series, the Mecha series, tons of those games. The drummer game, Taiko no Tatsujin. I'm terrible at rhythm games, but those games are fun, and there's a couple of them there. So just a system, I think, worth revisiting, worth exploring. I'm not sure what the prices are like, but if you like classic old-school JRPGs and you have a nostalgia for the 16 and 32-bit era of gaming, this is a system that you should consider collecting for. And like I said, experiment with all the different technological improvements that are out there for it, and you will have an absolute blast.